evening. Wow. I guess I was right on top of this. Welcome, everyone, to the meeting of the Carson City Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee. This is Monday, October 3rd, and it's 5:30 p.m. So I'd like to take the roll, please.
Chair Henneman.
Here.
Vice Chair Cardinal. Member Brago. Member Fant.
Here.
Member Castens. Member Lopez. Member Schutte. A quorum's present.
All right, thank you very much. Before we go on to the agenda, I'd like to acknowledge 3 people here from the Carson City Chamber 2023 Leadership Institute, and thank you for being here. And I hope that you will, in the future, also go to some of the other meetings that are far more interesting, that last far longer. So this is just a little taste of it. So we're now at the public comment section. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Carson City Redevelopment Authority Citizens Committee, also known as RACC, including any matter that is not specifically included on the agenda as an action item. So is there any public comment? Seeing no one rising to the occasion, we will go on. And that is number 3, the approval of the minutes of August 1st, 2022. Has everybody read the minutes? And are there any comments, corrections? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of approval of the minutes of August 1st?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous. All right, the first meeting item is the discussion and possible action regarding the progress of the downtown sidewalk project. So Hope, would you like to introduce this, please?
I'll just introduce Brianna Greenlaw, who's a project manager with our Public Works Department, and Randy Rice, who's our city engineer, and turn it over to them to give you the presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Randy Rice, city engineer, for the record. I don't believe many of you that are sitting here today, except for maybe the exception with Ronnie, were present when we did this originally a year ago. So it's probably a good idea that we give you all an update on what's happening here and kind of a little bit of the background and the history of this process, I guess. So that's why we're here today. And also, you know, it's not me that's doing a lot of the work. We have great project managers. And so I wanted to get some of our folks up here and a chance to introduce them to you all and see what great work they do. So with that, we'll kind of get this thing moving. A little bit of background. Back in 2022, I believe it was October, we came to this committee and asked for a recommendation of roughly $435,000. That's a breakdown that you're seeing in front of you over essentially 3 fiscal years. So I'll tell you what happened. Essentially in 2021, we had $200,000 allocated towards essentially sidewalks and downtown repair. And that was focused on redevelopment area number 2. At the same time, we're working on a project called Colorado Street, which is a complete streets project. It has CDBG funds and FTA funds, so it's federalized. And we had a budget shortfall. So during that time, we came to this committee and recommended an additional $130,000 be added to that $200,000 allocated in 2021 to help supplement that project because of that budget shortfall. At that same time, we also requested an additional $305,000 to do some work downtown in the redevelopment area number 1. And so that's what those breakdowns are that you're seeing presently. And then the difference of the extra $200,000, we presented back, I believe it was in April, with a 5-year CIP plan, which this committee, I believe, approved. And that essentially had an outlay of $200,000 for the next 5 years. The intent there is to utilize that $200,000 to go after additional federal grants. We're hoping upwards of $1 million per year, depending on how successful we are with those grants. And a lot of that money would be utilized for the match portion, which is usually an 80-20 percent mix. So we would have to come up with the 20% to match the federal 80%. So it's a very good value, and we hope to have a lot of great projects in the next 5 years. But that's essentially where this money came from and how we got to the point where we're at. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brianna, and she's going to give you a little bit more updates on the specifics on what's been happening in the past year that we've been working on these.
Hi, I'm Brianna, and here first we'll zoom in to redevelopment area 1. So on this fun little graphic that shows the streets in the downtown area, pretty much Stewart Telegraph area, you'll see red dots are missing curb ramps. Green are existing curb ramps, but not necessarily compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA compliance. And red shows sidewalks that have been observed to be missing, needing improvement or reconstruction. So you see a lot of red there, and that's what we're working on, reconstructing and adding facilities so that we can add connections to all these community services within this area. So you'll see little grayish brown boxes. Those are highlighting the project areas that are under consideration. So we're gonna go and zoom into each of those areas in this presentation and discuss those in more detail. So to start off here, you see the northwest corner of East Musser and North Stewart Street. You see the existing condition. It's a deteriorated sidewalk, curb and gutter, non-ADA compliant, great slopes, some of them exceeding 10%. ADA compliance is 1.5% to 2% for sidewalks. So you can see that this is not necessarily a pedestrian friendly for all pedestrians. Then on the proposed design side there, you see some fun civil 3D renderings that shows what it's going to look like with our improvements. So you'll see there we'll have a flattened out sidewalks that will be ADA compliant. You'll have a ramp that will go into the Mangiatuto restaurant. We'll have a drive access exit there that is a type 1 type exit for that will comply for pedestrians, wheelchair, all that kind of access. We'll also have a little landscape buffer that'll collect our roof drainage and get that out to our curb and gutter, and some retaining curb that will allow us to adjust those grades to that patio that is at Mangiatuto. So lots of little improvements to make all of this retrofit work. Next area that's included in this fiscal year 22 project is Anderson Street between East Caroline and East Washington Street. So you'll see in that existing condition, there's a deteriorated valley gutter, there's no curb ramp, and there's no sidewalk that connects up to Smith's grocery store. So we're gonna be adding in a new curb ramp, adding in sidewalk, and that'll be an important connection for those residents there to get up to that grocery store. We have a few items here that we're calling bid alternates. So this fiscal year 22 project is currently out to bid. Those last two areas that I just showed you were areas that are the main portions of the project. Our base bid is what we call them. These are areas that we hope to construct. We have design and construction plans for, but depending on what our construction bids come back to be, they may or may not get constructed with this fiscal year. So this first one is on the northwest corner of East Caroline and North Valley Street. So you'll see no curb ramps, no deteriorated valley gutter, the sidewalks in rough condition. And this is also a very important connection between these hotels and residences here getting up to Smith's grocery store again. So we'll be putting in linear ramps and a nice little connection there that will be much more pedestrian friendly. Last bid alternate as part of our fiscal year 22 will be the west side of the North Stewart and East Proctor intersection. So this is just north of the Mangiatuto restaurant. These ramps are non-ADA compliant, valley gutters in really rough shape, steep slopes. So we're looking at putting in ramps that will allow connectivity with that crosswalk on North Stewart, as well as continuing that accessibility. So that kind of fills out what our fiscal year 22 projects will be. Looking forward at fiscal year 23 money, as Randy mentioned, we are looking at an FTA grant, or we're proceeding with an FTA grant that's $180,000. This is for areas that have connectivity with bus stops. So as you see there with the 2 bus stops on East Robinson Street, we're going to be doing lots of curb ramps and sidewalk connections, bus stop improvements. We'll be able to have $180,000 for that FTA grant with a 20% match that we'd like to use the RACC funds for. We'll have an extra $155,000 left over, and so with that, we'd like to include sidewalk and ramp improvements for East Caroline Street shown to the north there, with potentially any fiscal year 22 alternates that weren't able to be constructed. So we'll just see how that all plays out as the bid opening happens here soon. Then moving on to redevelopment area number 2. This is, as Randy mentioned, a CBDG project that the city received funding for. There was a budget shortfall, and it was decided to be a good use of funds for RACC to contribute to this project. Unfortunately, due to supply chain shortages and the construction environment, we were unable to construct this project last year. So this is currently being rebid, and we hope to construct it in spring of 2023. A little summary here, next steps. So fiscal year 22 project, construction is expected to begin this fall. We do have it out to bid. We are hoping that we receive favorable bid prices, but we'll find out here soon. Fiscal year 23 project, that's in design, and construction is expected for summer 23. And for the redevelopment area 2, that's that Colorado Street pavement project. That project, as I mentioned, is being rebid. Construction hopefully spring 23. So, Randy, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think great job. I just wanted to mention bid alternates. If you're not familiar with how bid alternates work, I just wanted to kind of briefly discuss, because we threw that term out there and I'm not sure if everyone's familiar. So we're having a hard time right now with the way construction's going, estimating prices as well as we used to, right? We used to have it down to probably the closest dollar, and we'd be able to tell you exactly how many lineal feet of something we could build or how many square feet of something we could, lay out. That's become very, very challenging lately, and we're hoping that's normalizing here soon, but it's still in flux. So what a bid alternate allows us to do is it allows us to design something and putting it to a bid, but tell the contractor that it's price dependent. So if they don't give us favorable prices, then that would not be included in their awarded work. So essentially what we're trying to do is include as much of the design and construction work as we can with the money that we have without letting any money fall left on the table, if that makes sense. And so hopefully, if we are unsuccessful in fiscal year 22, getting all of the work that we want to get done with the money that we've budgeted, we're trying to take some of the excess money in 23, which will be left over because we have that grant money, to then go back and pay for those bid alternates we were not able to do. So we do have a plan and an outlay to spend all of that money. It's not as favorable as we'd like, and it takes longer to get to the finish line. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit.
Does anyone have any questions for us?
Not really. The only comment I have is it just seems, and I think you explained it, Randy, it just seems like this is taking forever, that we have talked about this for about 2 fiscal years, the same areas. So it's all a money situation?
It's not just the money situation. I will give you a little more background. When we started this process, we really didn't have the planning elements in place. It was still a very new process for us because we really hadn't had this funding source before, and we didn't really have a robust planning process. So once we came to this group to get that money situated, we developed a new process, which is much more robust. It has a better checks and balance system to make sure we get kind of the high priority areas first. And so as Brianna has put this together, the next following years should fall into place quicker and quicker, because now we're a little bit ahead of the curve on what we want to do for the next areas. And so I guess part of that is getting the priorities in queue, and then that has to go to design. So the other side of that challenge is finding both staff resources or consultant resources. Oftentimes when we reach out to consultants, they're busy as well. And so oftentimes they'll be 3, 4, 5 months out before they can get to our work as well. So it's part of just getting into the queue. And now that we have this funding source is just managing it into the overall public works work.
Okay, does anybody have any comments or questions?
I was just going to say thank you. I live in a neighborhood, 3 of our 4 corners are now ADA compliant, and it's really making a difference for the wheelchair-bound residents, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's hope that this does get off the ground, because one of the things that we have discussed in the past is if you don't use your money, you lose it. Use it or lose it, okay? So, and I think that that's one of the things that we have to be very good on, because might as well put this money to use somewhere if we can't do what you want to do. So that goes on record. Use it or lose it, okay? All right, so we'll go on to, and that basically concludes your presentation then? Okay, so we will go on to the next item, which is discussion and possible action regarding the progress of the William Street Complete Streets Project Design Plans. Hope?
On this one, I'm going to introduce Project Manager Darren Anderson. I think he's brought people. I'll let him introduce them. And this is an exciting project. I'm excited for Darren's presentation.
Good evening. So we've got myself and then Randy Rice, city engineer, and Angie Huffley from NCE.
Angie Heffley.
All right, so I'm going to kick us off, and then I'll turn it over to Darren, or to I think Angie next for the next portion of this. But essentially, we've been working on this for quite a while now, and the reason we're presenting this to you all is because RACC funding was approved as part of the design and construction of this project. A little bit of background of this project. What we're trying to do is we're trying to transform this into a complete street project. It's a beautification project. It's a safety improvement project. It's going to go from North Carson Street all the way down to Russell Way, which is just west of the I-580 off-ramp there on William Street. You know, it's busy, it's congested. We have speeding problems, right? We actually had a fatality on one of the intersections at State there a number of years back. And so we know it's a problem. It's an old NDOT road, and the corridor has transformed, you know, since we've taken this road over. And so it's incumbent upon us to make some changes to this road so that it interacts with the community the way it's intended to, right, now that we have a changed use. So over time, we've had a number of public outreach meetings. We've reached out to residents and people and businesses in the corridor. We've done door knocks. We've held open meetings where people can come and point to maps and tell us what they know about the corridor, problems they've been experiencing, things they would like to see incorporated with the project. During that time, we've reviewed travel lane widths, you know, what's comfortable for businesses and pedestrians from a design standpoint, from a safety standpoint. We've also talked to cyclists and other people who, you know, walk their dogs, that visit the park, to understand how they use it. As you can imagine, some people say we want the road to stay how it is or be faster because they want to get to their commute sooner. We've had other people say, wow, it needs to slow way down, right? So we have a wide range of viewpoints. We of course have people that have a hard time accessing the corridor. Committee member Fant mentioned, you know, accessibility with some of these ramps. We have a number of missing sidewalks, you know, incompatible ADA ramps and other components to the corridor that make it hard to access, incomplete multi-use paths. So we're aiming to change and fix some of those deficiencies with this project. Of course, we want to support land use and economic development. What does that mean? It means making sure the corridor functions and flows the way it's intended to. Access management, right? Not having too many points of ingress and egress into the corridor. Accommodating multimodal travel capacity, that's bikes, pedestrians, you know, people that use transit as well as vehicular transportation. And of course, we're growing. So we had to look at this project not only for today, but also into the future, right? So we have to make sure that we're not making major modifications to the corridor that then somehow impact people into the future as we continue to grow and experience growth in Carson City. And then, of course, there's the basic things such as improving utility and drainage. We have a number of low-impact development components that we're planning, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more here a little bit, but essentially improving water quality. As we have precipitation, we want to make sure, oils and, pollutant sources are mitigated to the extent practical. So during the process, we had a community outreach event, multiple. During this initial visit, we visited essentially 85 businesses in January. We received 229 survey responses in our interactive map, just survey responses in general that we put out. We had 120 comments on our interactive map. We also partnered with Carson High School to design a project logo, which you saw on the first slide. That was actually a really fun part of that, involving the community and getting their perspective. We've had 3 open house meetings since February 2022. We also had a public meeting in May of 2022. And during that time, we've discussed project features, timelines, opportunities. Again, we've kind of touched on some of those. And I think one of the important bullets to point out here is most people have been very positive about this. I know a lot of these road projects can be controversial. They can be painful. A lot of businesses are concerned about, downtime to where their potential customers are coming from, how they're accessing their business. And it's painful, right? Sometimes changes is difficult. But I will say a majority of people that we've talked to were very complimentary of the project so far and excited to see some of these changes coming to the project. Some of the comments that we've received, pedestrian improvements, right? We talked about that, but that was a big one that hit a number of checkboxes for people, is making sure we can access the businesses, the multi-use path, the park, and do it safely. Access management we talked about, and then also landscaping and aesthetics was actually very high on a number of the comments, and we do plan to incorporate a lot of those into the project. But oftentimes that kind of gets overlooked, but a lot of people do really appreciate having a nice, beautiful corridor to walk down and enjoy. So we did send out a pamphlet essentially that asked people to tell us a little bit about how they experienced the corridor. 93% of them travel by car. Most people travel to and from businesses or to the I-580 corridor. And again, they have prioritized beautification, actually as one of the highest items on there. Safety was number 2, traffic operations, flow of traffic, and then bike and pedestrian enhancements for other multimodal support. So this was a pretty cool one. This is an interactive comment map, and what we allowed us to do is take information on the fly. So we pushed out this map, and it's on carsonproud.org, and it invited people to come to this GIS map and place an icon. On that icon, they were able to locate it somewhere within the corridor that has a northern and easting for us to utilize in our design, in our time designing this project. And so we had a number of different categories: pedestrian, bicycle, road, traffic, parking, stormwater, and then other. So they would go onto this map, they would select the type of comment they would like to make, and they would place it on the map that was relevant to that location. And the reason that's important is because it's one thing to say vague statements, right? Oh, it's too fast. Oh, this place doesn't drain. They have drainage problems, right? If we want to get down to really the source of the problem, we need to understand where. And so this map was the ability to link those two aspects, right? What is the problem and where is it located? And so as you can see, littered throughout the corridor, we had, I think it was, like I said, 120 comments. The green and yellow or green and orange boxes are representative of what we were hearing from our different commenters. So, please consider alternatives to ped crossings, add trees, walkways, public art. So those things, those are example comments, but we got, over 100 comments about drainage problems, accessibility problems, speed problems, traffic flow problems. And Angie will probably touch on this a little bit later in her part of the presentation, but many of those comments were utilized to help kind of guide the design and where we're going with the project. So I touched on these a little bit already, but you can kind of read through some of these. These are some examples of landscaping photos or RFBs that we've used in past projects. But again, it's enhancing accessibility for essentially everybody, right? Not just one type of person. Enhancing street lighting, that's one we haven't touched on. We're also looking at enhancing the lights in that corridor. We're also working at the same time undergrounding a number of the overhead power lines. A lot of people did mention essentially the unsightly look of having the large power lines in that corridor. And so we do have some funds available to us to take care of those problems. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Angie Huffley with our design team, and she'll talk about the process.
Thanks, Randy. For the record, Angie Heffley with NCE. I am the project manager for the design consultant that's helping the city deliver this important project. I'm going to talk through the steps that we went through to get a preferred alternative for the corridor. We developed a feasibility study. We investigated the existing conditions. We developed and evaluated alternatives, and that led us to the preferred alternative for the corridor. The things that we considered, Randy touched on the project goals a little earlier in the presentation. For existing conditions, we needed to consider the existing right-of-way width, as well as the existing features that are out there now. There's a lot of multi-use paths and sidewalks that are there today that we're hoping we can connect to, as well as lighting and the travel patterns of both pedestrians and auto were also considered in the existing conditions. We considered the public feedback as well as the traffic operations. A traffic report was prepared, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail later. And then the city's existing plans and policies, such as the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, the General Master Plan, the Unified Master Pathway Plan, and more. Next slide. So what we did was we broke the corridor into 4 segments: North Carson to Stewart, Stewart to Roop, Roop to Salomon, and Salomon to I-580. And the reason we did that is, you know, the corridor really transforms from west to east. It's hard to just do, you know, one size fits all through the corridor. The speeds increase, the volume increases, the width increases as you get closer to the freeway. And we developed multiple alternatives for each segment. And this included a combination of bike and ped improvements, such as dedicated bicycle lanes or buffered bicycle lanes, as well as separated multi-use paths and wide sidewalks. And then each of the alternatives included opportunities for landscaping, traffic calming, travel lane, and intersection reconfigurations. Next slide. So then we performed a qualitative analysis of each of the alternatives. On the slide, you'll see a list of what each alternative was evaluated for. And we reviewed the existing information and technical studies that were prepared. We brainstormed with the city planners and engineers on maintenance and functionality. And we compared, for each of the alternatives, we compared operations, the costs, the sustainability, and then also the user experience that we would get out of the alternative. Next. So the preferred alternative throughout the whole corridor includes beautification, traffic and safety improvements, multimodal enhancements, as Randy mentioned, utility undergrounding and replacements. And that's not just because they're unsightly, but because many of the poles are blocking the sidewalks, and it'll be very difficult to get our ADA clearance without removing the poles. And then runoff water quality improvements to be installed within the landscape areas. Next slide. So this shows the preferred alternative from North Carson to Roop Street. And so you'll see this is looking east towards I-580. So you'll see we have our, he's not called a walkie guy, walkie dude, but basically the guy walking east down the road to show the direction that our cross sections are in. And from North Carson to Stewart Street, we are going to have dedicated bicycle lanes in each direction, as well as a wide sidewalk that is separated from the road with a wide landscape strip. And you also see on this map that we have shown potential bus stop locations. So the jump around Carson Transit line is going to be expanded through here. I believe eastbound is now potentially going to go from Carson to I-580, and westbound it's going to go from I-580 to North Roop Street. So we've identified locations. We're going to be working closely with the city's transit department and planning department to identify where those stops are going to go. Between Stewart and Roop Street, we also have dedicated bicycle lanes, as well as sidewalks and landscape area. This is actually the most constrained area in the corridor. It's got the smallest amount of right-of-way, plus some buildings that are up pretty close to the edge of the road. So we won't be able to get as large of a landscape strip as we can between Carson and Stewart Street, but we're going to be maintaining existing landscaping where we can, and then also enhancing where we have room. Next slide. From Roop to Salomon, the roadway gets much larger. In this area, we're able to put in a buffered bike lane, which means we can have a 3-foot separation between the cars and the bikes. That's been shown to provide a better experience, not only for bicyclists, but for automobiles as well. This segment, this cross-section, I know it's probably it's hard to see on the screen, but this is at Mills Park, where we're going to be enhancing the parking that's there for Mills Park, as well as adding electric vehicle charging stations in this area, and landscaping wherever we can. Next slide. And then from Salomon to Gold Dust West, we also have enough room to put in the buffered bicycle lanes, as well as landscape area, which is going to separate the multi-use paths and sidewalks from the travelway, which again, that's more comfortable for pedestrians when you can be separated from the travel lanes. Next. So a traffic study was performed as part of our technical studies, and they analyzed the morning, afternoon, and midday peak period for years 2022, 2030, and 2050. And the traffic report identified a number of deficiencies that's going to happen in the future during those future years. And so to mitigate for those deficiencies, as well as to make space for the other uses in the corridor, there's going to be a number of improvements that will be put into place. So this is a summary of the key traffic changes and improvements. From Carson to Stewart Street, we're going to be reducing the eastbound lanes from 2 to 1. At the Stewart intersection, we're going to be adding a northbound right turn lane. At the State Street intersection, there's recommendations for an addition of a crosswalk with a PED flasher system. There's a lot of pedestrians that cross right there. They will also have what's called a pedestrian refuge in the middle where they can stop if they need to. And then in the future, it's recommended that the southbound left turn movement from State Street gets eliminated. We're still looking at the timing of that and when those improvements will be put into place, whether or not they'll be put in place as part of this project or potentially a future improvement that the city can go in and make when it gets closer to that year of when those improvements need to be in place. At the Salomon intersection, we're going to eliminate a westbound right turn lane. I also have a slide, a little more detail showing the Salomon intersection here coming up. And then throughout the corridor, signal optimization and coordination improvements. At some intersections will be increasing like the pedestrian interval to get across the road in the high pedestrian areas. Next. So this is a picture of the Salomon intersection. This is it as is existing. This is showing the changes, and then we're going to highlight what's actually happening. So there's a lot going on in this intersection. Starting sort of from the right to left, you'll see that we're removing that right turn pocket that would go northbound on Salomon. We're able to adjust the curb lines, which shortens the pedestrian crossings. We're going to be able to put in buffered bike lanes in both directions. Remove one of the left turn lanes going eastbound and then north onto Salomon. That allows us a little bit more room on the south side of the road there to put in the bike lanes as well as directional ped ramps, which will provide more pedestrian storage. I know this is an intersection that gets a lot of pedestrians. And then we'll put in the signal timing modifications, and then also increasing the left turn storage lanes onto Salomon as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Darren.
So we have here listed the funding sources for the project, which altogether come out to a little over $23 million. The RAISE grant, which is listed at the top at $9.3 million, was a very big deal to help get this project started in the time frame that it is started. The second one listed here is the federal earmark, and that's in the amount of $2 million. That one, the money from that source is going towards the undergrounding of overhead power lines that were mentioned previously. And then we have the local funding sources being redevelopment, infrastructure tax, stormwater, water, and sewer. Project team's been pretty busy over the last several months, and that's going to continue over probably the next year, really. And so we've finished up 30% design and are working towards 60% design. Along with that, we've been talking to the oversight agencies being FHWA and NDOT and developing the environmental document, as well as discussing right-of-way acquisition and other needs related to right-of-way. Our goal is to have 60% design complete by December of 2022, and then for final design to be finished up in summer of 2023, with construction then beginning in the end of 2023 or early 2024. Back early on in design or in the project, Randy had mentioned all the outreach that was done. We've been fairly quiet over the last several months, but that effort is going to pick back up once we get to 60% design. We plan on having a community meeting at that point, as well as reaching out to the individual business owners along the corridor and talking about how the project may affect them once complete and during construction. We also have a construction impacts workshop that we do towards the end of design after or around the time that the project's bid, to help explain what the businesses and residents in the area are to expect when the project gets constructed. And the other item we have is the future updates to the RACC, RTC, and the Board of Supervisors. We plan to come back at 60% and then 90% to present progress on the project. We have listed here a few communication tools that we've set up for those to help be updated on where the project's at and what's going on. The Carson Proud website there is where we post a lot of our larger transportation projects. And so we'll post an update on how design is progressing and what we're up to. William Street's on there as one of the tabs. We have a text notification service that we subscribe to so when someone texts that number that's listed and says Carson Proud, they'll be added to that list. And then when any updates made to the Carson Proud site, they'll be notified that an update's been posted and to go to the Carson Proud site to see what that update is. Then the last, there is my contact information. Anybody's more than welcome to email or give me a call, and I'm happy to field any questions or comments. So that does it for our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, from the committee, are there any comments or questions?
Overall comment that this is so needed, so I'm excited about this. Obviously, 2024 is a ways out, but we'll just have to wait, but excited about this project.
Anybody else?
Chair, can I ask a question? Darren, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Angie, can you go over the State Street, William Street intersection improvements again? I was trying to track that. I'm not sure I got it. I'm worried about with Mills Landing and the U-Haul construction, how that all works.
And your question was the improvements to be recommended at State Street?
Right now, that's a pretty busy intersection.
Yes. We're proposing a pedestrian crossing, the rapid flashing beacon, a symbol that pedestrians can push. Within that crossing, there will be a refuge that they can stop. At State Street, the recommendation in the future is to prevent left turns out of State Street. So, yeah, to prevent you turning left onto William Street. I believe that is the Starbucks parking lot, right? So if you're coming out of the Starbucks, you wouldn't be able to turn left in the future.
You would either have to
turn
head
right.
towards Carson Street, or you'd have to loop back around to Salomon
Yeah.
to the light, to the intersection.
Is it Long? I think it's Long Street.
I don't think that's going to be so popular. I have a couple of comments too as I'm looking at this. You did not go on up to Gold Dust West. Is that because it hasn't been designed yet, or, because I have a couple of comments on that.
So the work essentially east of Salomon is pretty minimal. It's mostly striping, changing lane width configurations, buffering widths, the inclusion of bike lanes in that area, but there's not a ton of aesthetics or sidewalk, because a lot of that area is already completed. So we're focusing most of our financial needs further to the east.
Well, the one comment that I have is we have a very expensive multi-use athletic center there that you cannot get to if you're going east at all. So there's not going to be any design to allow you to get easier to that, so you don't have to take, what's the name of the street that's just beyond? You have to go on the other side of the freeway in Lumpa Lane.
Lumpa Lane, yeah.
So, I mean, it's really now, I mean, it was meant to be a tourism attraction as well to get, tournaments or whatever there. And I don't know how, if you do not live there, in fact, the people who live here now don't know how to get to it when you're coming from the east. So that is not part of the design?
Correct. At this point, that's not been included in any grant packets or any information at this point.
I would think that if you were going to do something, it would be now. The other thing, too, is one of the big things that we learned when we were doing the South Carson Street project is you had to put in, for the government grants, you had to put in the roundabouts. I noticed that there is no roundabouts here. Is there a reason why?
I'll take the first stab at this one. Roundabouts are very helpful, and there was discussions of a number of locations that made sense to have a roundabout. I believe State Street was one of them, and I think the other one was Roop Street. Part of having a roundabout in these corridors requires larger roundabouts for them to work from a safety standpoint. When you start putting in roundabouts in those areas that I described, the amount of procurement and acquisition of right-of-way becomes extensive. So oftentimes it means displacing businesses and purchasing plots of land, which not only raises the price, but it's very, very difficult to design around, especially when we have constraints in this corridor. So the decision was made not to include roundabouts at this point for that reason.
The only reason I mention that is because it was a big issue for the South Carson Street, and we were told over and over and over again, suck it up, guys, because it's coming, because it's part of the federal mandate. So I see, even with the federal money, it's not because of the reasons that you mentioned. Okay, and the third thing that I have is, I happen to like trees and planting and the whole bit, but I noticed that the trees in the downtown, as well as in South Carson, do not look robust at all, because they do not look like they've been watered at all, especially this year in the heat. And what do you do? I'm just curious, for the past and for the future, what do you do for those poor trees who are so happily at the nursery, and then we put them in our ground and they die?
That's a great question. So there's essentially three things that we try to do. Number one, we have a 1-year warranty on any new vegetation that enters into the project. It's not uncommon for, a small percentage, 10, 20% of those trees to come onto a project that just, because of their ability and being mass produced and shipped around, they end up not making it. So the taxpayer of Carson City does not pay for any of those replacements. That's built into the project cost from the beginning. And so whatever vendor we utilize for that project, they would be replaced at no charge. Anytime we include landscaping in the right-of-way, we're going to include irrigation infrastructure to support that vegetation, right? Because it has to have it to grow. Oftentimes our resources are stretched, things get broken, an irrigation line is not working, it freezes up, whatever. So that we rely on really residents to inform us on that if there are problems, and we try to check those as often as possible. Of course, we just have to replace those as time allows us to get to those, pending our resources. And then third is selecting the right vegetation for the right of way, right? So we've had a good effort in the last couple of years to make sure that the flora and the fauna that we're putting in the right of way is the correct. It's meant to grow in small, tight spaces. It's meant to have limited water needed to make it grow. And then also part of that is making sure that and this comes from the inspection side during construction, is making sure that the surrounding soil is amenable to plant the plants, right? Because oftentimes we'll have concrete and construction debris and things like that if it doesn't get removed can often impact because of the pH from, say, the concrete coming into the soil that leaches into the vegetation. So there really are a number of things, but again, we get as much as we can, and we're vigilant as much as we can be. But the ones that you're talking about, there is a plan to go and fix the ones on South Carson Street that are struggling.
Because it's really rather sad, to see what look like robust trees just dying on the vine, if you will. So, okay, those are basically, you've answered my comments. Anybody else have any as a result of this?
I have 2 questions, kind of to piggyback off of Ronnie. Because resources are so stretched, who would be responsible for maintaining those landscape strips, which seem to be long? And then my second question, at that intersection of Solomon, because the high school is right there, and obviously that's our biggest PED crossing, is construction going to be relatively quick, especially at that point, so that those kids aren't just, running across the street instead of, going to another intersection or waiting like they're supposed to?
Yeah, 2 really good questions. I'll address the pedestrian one first. So that kind of goes into the community outreach and engagement portion, working with the high school to understand, the time and duration that children are released from the high school. Is it quick? Not really, but understanding the concerns of that environment, we will certainly do our best and work with the contractor to understand those concerns and work around them. We'll make sure we have dedicated, crossing areas. And when those areas are blocked off, we'll have alternative detours. Just like you would see a detour for traffic, we will have a pedestrian detour in place to kind of mitigate some of those challenges.
Yeah,
And
they
we'll
may
work
be
through
in
them as
place,
quickly
they
as
just
possible.
probably wouldn't be used.
That's
by
fair.
those
Yes,
teenagers.
yes. And so part of that may be just enforcement with the high school, right, and working out some ideas there. As far as the landscaping goes, we plan to have another neighborhood improvement district for this corridor as well, just like we did for South Carson and downtown. And so the landscaping would be maintained by that neighborhood improvement district.
Thank you.
Other than the downtown, the neighborhood improvement districts don't seem to be very effective, unfortunately. And you're assessing them quite a bit of money, so I don't know. I think it's somebody's not turning on the water, really, or giving them food. Any other comments or questions? Nothing? Okay, so we don't really have to do anything on this, it's just a report. Okay, and let's do it right. I am still concerned about what we're going to do about the multi-use athletic center going east, because that seems to me a funny location to have put it in the first place, and now you still are not going to be able to get to it. So, all right, so we have done with that. All right, then discussion, staff reports and updates on matters relating to the RACC. Hope?
At the board meeting on Thursday, I'll be bringing the resolution, which will essentially be authorizing the payment of the revolving fund items that have been approved by the board. So some of you may have seen that in the newspaper and be wondering why this is going to the Redevelopment Authority and the Board of Supervisors. Truth of the matter is I'm a bit late on it, but it has been approved in the budget, and this is just authorizing the payment of the bills.
Could I add a little bit more on the Russell Way, the Russell Way movement? So we did look at that early on in design as part of the traffic impact study, And the challenge there is that left turn movement being so close to the I-580 interchange. And so the left turn movements to northbound I-580, the Q pocket there goes past Russell Way to where if we were to allow that movement, it would conflict with the intersection or the interchange.
Oh, and I understand that because I live over in that area and it's just coming from, from the east to the west, it's okay because you've got that right turn lane into Russell, but I don't know how it ever got to go there without having the proper exits or whatever, but just a comment, for the record, okay? So are you through, Hope?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. RACC member reports and comments. Does anybody have any? Okay, the only comment that I have is this is October. So October, everybody knows it means Nevada Day, and RACC does support Nevada Day to the tune of $25,000. So henceforth, I had to bring that up. So, and it is the biggest celebration of all, and I hope that everybody goes to it. It's a fun time. So, and then the next RACC project that we'll be doing is Silver and Snowflakes coming up December 2nd, and that is in the planning stages, are actually mostly finished. So those are the only comments I have on that. So anybody else? Okay, so we have one more chance at public comment. Does anybody here have any public comment? Oh, you've got something?
I'll just make a quick public comment on the engine house arch that I know you're so eagerly awaiting.
Please.
So just a quick update for you all who maybe weren't a part of that original meeting. We have $265,000 we're working with to build and facilitate the design for that project. We've encumbered about $43,000 right now for the design, which includes structural, civil, architectural, and that gets us all the way through construction and construction inspection. So we have about $220,000 left after that to do the construction. We're working our way towards 90% design right now. We were hit with a little bit of delay because of the structural. There was a huge backlog and trying to get that into the queue. We've resolved that, and so that's moving forward, and we hope to have that out to bid here, hopefully the next few months, and then hopefully next spring when construction rolls around, we'll have a project, assuming prices go well. I think I mentioned a few months ago that we are looking at potentially a budget shortfall because of the extra structural that we were not prepared for. Just a little bit of background on that. As a reminder, that sandstone is a very weak rock. We've been working with some subject matter experts to understand the best way to use that. It sounds like we are moving forward with the kind of facade. So rather than using the sandstone as the structural component, we're using it as kind of a facade around a structural CMU pillar, if that makes sense. So that's all been resolved. It has been quite a challenging project, but we look forward to hopefully bidding that out and getting some good prices and having that around next year.
Okay, I'm going to give you a drop-dead deadline date, July 4th, 2023. You were supposed to have had it done this year, 2022, but let's shoot for July 4th so that we can have a big celebration, okay? All right. So anything else? Any other public comments? Yes?
Pepsi Strasburg. I have a question on the timeline. I wasn't able to follow it very quickly, but will the design be 100% complete by the time the William Street project, will the design be 100% complete before the public gets a chance to look at it? So that's my first question. And the second question is, with all the modifications that are being anticipated, does the design model anticipate a speed limits or speed reductions or that type of things? Thank you.
Yeah, so Darren Anderson, project manager. So as far as the schedule goes, 60% design is planned to be ready in December, at which time we'll also be having a public meeting as well as reaching out to the businesses and residents along the corridor. So at between 60 and 90% is when that next opportunity to understand all that we're doing and provide comment will be, and then it'll be another roughly half year before design is finalized. The speed limit, we did have that included as a part of the analysis of the traffic impact study, and it's generally staying the same. I think from what I remember, I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, do that.
Yeah, I think as Darren mentioned, I think at this point, the best we can say is the speed limit. Looking at the different scenarios between now, 2030 and 2050, again, we have to anticipate growth. It'd be great to say, hey, we can, shave off 5 miles here, 10 miles there. But unfortunately, when we're working with that growth model, we have to kind of account for more vehicles coming onto the roadway. And so the current recommendation as of this point is to keep things roughly the same.
I don't drive that very much. What is the speed limit? 25, 35? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it's 35 and it increases to 45 as you get closer to the freeway. Yeah, those limits are going to adjust slightly, but it's generally be 25 on the west side, 35 through the Mills Park area, and then increase towards the east.
Okay, I know everything is subject to change, so thank you for your questions. So any other public comments? Nope. Okay, hearing none. I will I want to first thank you, leadership class, for being here. And I will entertain a possible motion for adjournment.
Motion for adjournment.
Okay, second? Do I hear a-
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you and good night. We'll see you probably in December. Bye-bye.